welcome. I'm assuming people know who I am. In case you don't, my name's Stuart Waiton. I'm the chairperson for the Scottish Union for Education, which we set up a few months ago, as you can see behind, with our concerns about indoctrination rather than education. I've got Jim Sillars today. It's I don't know whether it's embarrassing for Jim or not, but the reason I've invited Jim is because I've heard him a few times and I've always been profoundly impressed by what an intelligent, enlightened individual he is. And he spoke at the Dundee event that we organised, and it was interesting that Jim called himself a politician, but he did so in a way that was meaningful, as if this is important and significant. It's a thing, being a politician. And it struck me because I can't remember when the last time, if ever, I've heard a politician describe themselves as a politician, and for it to be meaningful. It's almost a word that you would use with embarrassment or a sense of shame or something, and I would be surprised you'd find many politicians would be able to say, I'm a politician, with a sense of pride and seriousness. And it does remind me that times have changed, and perhaps I'm doing Jim a disservice, but I suspect there were other politicians like Jim in his day who were profoundly serious individuals, who took themselves seriously, who took their intellect seriously and took the world seriously, and most importantly, I suppose, took politics seriously, which is a breath of fresh air. So I've always been a little bit surprised whenever I hear or see Jim speak, because it's like a blast from a different time or universe now. So anyway, I'm absolutely delighted to have Jim here. He spoke at our Dundee event, as I said, and I just thought, well, you know, this is a man who's worth listening to. So without any further ado, I'm going to open up a few questions. But the way I'm going to work this is I'll probably ask Jim some questions for, say, 20 minutes, and then I'm just going to open it up. You can put there's a little raise your hand thing, I think, in reactions. You can raise your little hand and then I can unmute you, and we can just have an open public discussion. So I'm going to kick off. I like to kick off. I don't know why I like to kick off with this sort of question, but I do. And I thought I'd ask you, Jim, about your childhood. I suppose partly your school, but I suppose I'm interested in what sort of kid you were, and what sort of childhood you had. If you can remember that far back, he says cheekily. So over to you.
Yeah, well, I come from a railway family. My grandfather and his brother were engine drivers. My father was an engine driver, and I ended up on the footplate as a cleaner and then as a fireman as well. And I think even my great-grandfather, I'm not quite sure, but I think he was a railman as well. Because in those days, to get a job in the railway on the footplate of a steam engine, you actually had to be, quote, spoken for, unquote. So railway families tended to produce other railway workers. I had just the usual working class childhood. I was born in 1937, so in a sense, I'm a child of the war. The only two things that really mattered were football and boxing. As far as school went, I regarded it as a 10-year prison sentence. My mother had died when I was just coming on 4. So it was my granny who took me to the first day at school, and I ran away And I think I ran away for about the next 6 weeks because I hated the place and hated it right through Newton Park School, right through to Ayr Academy. In fact, I didn't go to my last 3 months of secondary school. I plunked it every day along with a pal, absolutely detested it. My introduction to Ayr Academy was when the register teacher, who was the deputy rector, called us up one after the other just to check who we were. And he said to me, "Sillars, are you any relation to that Robert Sillars, who was here a couple of years ago?" And I said, "Yes, sir, that was my brother." To which he told me that I would be a common labourer just like my brother. That was day one in Ayr Academy. You know, I was outraged because lots of middle-class intellectuals who are sort of in love in an abstract way with the working class are not aware that the working class has its own hierarchy. And my brother was an apprentice bricklayer, which certainly made him 2 or 3 notches up being a common labourer. And once that happened to me at Ayr Academy, that was it. I had no interest in it whatsoever. And I've never been happier than to leave an institution. That last day I went along to meet the rector, who told me I would never make anything of myself. So that I had a happy childhood playing football, interested in boxing, interested in the railway, but the school side, I say, it was a 10-year prison sentence for me.
Okay. So, well, I'll not draw these out, but people can come back to them because that's kind of interesting in and of itself. I'm just going to jump.
System.
Oh, there's a shush, whoever that was. If you can mute yourself, if there's someone new in, I'll try and find who that was. I'm going to just jump in, not because I'm not interested in this, but just I suppose we can't avoid it. I'm just going to jump into now and the mess the SNP are in. Now, part of my concern with this is that over the last 20 years, especially more recently, politics and politicians, and to some extent political parties, you could say, have been dragged down by what I would describe as technicalities rather than by politics. So rather than being there's some profound political disagreement with somebody or something, it's almost like a human resources framework for, or policing framework for politicians being shamed or political parties being shamed and so on. Now, that doesn't mean what's happening with the SNP doesn't deserve certain investigation, but I'm always a little bit uncomfortable when the police are center stage with politics and politicians. So I'll just throw open a question about what do you make of what's happening at the minute with the SNP in terms of the whole financial meltdown and so on?
Well, I personally think it was inevitable because the cult of personality had been the key to what has happened inside the SNP. And it was actually started by Alex Salmond. When I lost Govan, I had to find work elsewhere, and so gave up being deputy leader of the party. And I had actually stood as deputy leader in order to always be there to balance what I regarded as Alex's ego. Now, when I say that, don't misunderstand me. I regarded and still regard Salmond as one of the major politicians in Europe. It doesn't matter where Alex Salmond would go, whatever electoral forum he was in, Alex Salmond would be equal to anybody else. But I wasn't there to say, hey, you're wrong. And what happened was that Alex gathered acolytes around him. And there's a I think it's what used to be called the Glasgow Herald headline after the 1993 conference. And it goes along the lines of, Salmon tells his dissidents to shut up. And by 1998 conference, the report in the papers was SNP conference, Salmon, 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 such as the domination. Nicola just simply took over from Alec in terms of the cult of personality and intensified it. Then there was the added factor that her husband was the chief executive of the organization. And now, Peter was a very good organizer, but basically I think what happened, that he organized the party to make sure it never in any way criticized Nicola. And Nicola fell for the cult of personality. Some people tonight will remember that large meeting in Glasgow, 12,500 with Nicola like a Hollywood star. I mean, I remember watching it and thinking, no, this is not right. This will get us into trouble. And so the cult of personality developed, the control of the party developed, and it became politically corrupt. I don't mean somebody putting money in the back pocket. I mean political corruption. In fact, I had to look out a letter that I wrote to the Scotsman on the 31st of January, 2021, where I said, I don't know about Denmark, but there's something rotten in the state of Scotland. Now, I didn't anticipate the detailed problems we're getting now, but in my memoir, when I was writing about this, I pointed out that the cult of personality always ends in tears. Now, if you think of Richard Nixon, if you think of Margaret Thatcher's cult of personality, and the tears outside of Downing Street after she made a fundamental error on the poll tax, and now it's ended in tears for the SNP. And I think the damage is quite profound. Take a long time to recover from this, but it was inevitable. And the membership, if there's any member among the audience tonight, you have as much responsibility as Nicola Sturgeon, because the membership let it happen. The membership agreed to changes in the constitution, which increased the power and control of the leadership. They should never have done that. And they got to the stage where annual conference was a nonsense. Nicola could have got up and recited, Mary had a little lamb, and she'd have got a standing ovation. Such was the intellectual hollowing out of the membership. So I'm not at all surprised.
Yeah. Moving on to Holyrood. So I've been to Holyrood a few times, where I've been invited onto a committee. Well, I was going to say I'm always surprised, but it's not true. I'm not surprised, but I turn up and the people who are there sitting on the committee are the usual organizations. And it feels whenever I go there that Holyrood works through these groups. So there's certain groups that are good groups, whether it's a kind of LGBT or whether it's human rights or whatever it is. There's certain groups that seem to be interconnected with how Holyrood works. So rather than the public and how the public operate and how you think about politics, or how I would think about politics and having a public meeting and so on, Holyrood doesn't seem to work like that at all. And I was listening to Ian McGuirter, and he made the observation, which I'd kind of half forgotten, that I think it was around 2018-19, the SNP changed the nature of their, I think it was their National Executive Committee, to co-opt these interest groups, the sort of LGBT, etc. which sounds like a significant move. I'm not sure how significant it is, but it does sound like part of this trajectory towards politics becoming a kind of interest group phenomenon that has very, very little to do with the public and public participation. So, I mean, crudely put, I suppose I would say it's almost like Holyrood seems just to be a woke institution, to use that rather crude term. Is that, do you get a sense of that? I mean, is that significant what happened to the National Executive? Do you feel Holyrood is lost at the minute in terms of how it operates?
The SNP that I joined had an extremely democratic constitution. You had real debates at the annual conference. There were real fights between the left and right for membership of the National Executive, because that was the ruling organ of the party. And there would be about, I think, roughly 20 of us would be elected. A number of us then got office bearers responsibility, policy, organization. The National Council met every 6 months, and we had to submit, if you were an office bearer, you had to submit a written report to National Council, and you had to go up and you were questioned, you were totally accountable. John Swinney began, when he became leader, began to change the constitution. And it became worse as time went on through Nicola. We now have the position where there's a National Executive, not around about 20, but over 40, in which the elected component, the people elected at annual conference, are in a minority. And special interest groups, who are all members of the party, certainly, are in the majority. And so we go into this very strange situation where they use their power in the National Executive for ideas that matter to them, but don't necessarily matter to the wider party or indeed the wider public. Now, I'll give you an example from the last Holyrood election. When it comes to the list system, all the party, being here in Lothian, I got papered through with 12 names, which I had to list from 1 to 12 in my preference, because number 1 or number 2, depending on how the constituency votes go, have a good chance of getting in. Now, everywhere that was done regionally. Then, lo and behold, I'm told that number 1 on the Lothian list is a Glasgow councillor, and that number 1 in the South of Scotland list is a disabled person. Now, the reason that we got the Glasgow councillor as number 1 is that he is part of the Black community, therefore he's a minority, and he's punted number 1. The one in the south of Scotland who claimed to be disabled, the disability is diabetes. Now, I am diabetic, and I don't think at all that I am disabled or anybody else I've met. But they decided that in every region, the number 1 person, whether the party members wanted them or not, was going to be either from the BAME community or the disabled community or the LGBT community. And that's a complete distortion of how democracy actually should work at the present time. And as I say, that I've been watching this happen like a slow car crash over a number of years. I mean, on television, one of the interviewers said to me, did nobody ever say anything about this? Of course we did, but just the very few of us was able to put our heads above the parapet and say this is wrong, and we were swept aside. Quite often I was invited by other party members to resign on the basis they didn't know why I was still in the party. That, we've gone into one hell of a state simply because we have left the idea of a democratic organization with internal accountability, because these special groups are not accountable to the annual conference. So I don't know who they're accountable to, but they're not accountable to the party membership.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to this, I suspect. But at your in your talk at the Dundee event, which was quite broad and wide-reaching, you discussed a variety of problems with education. So I'm just going to get you to sort of have a few minutes to say some of the things that you said about that. I mean, I noticed this week, for example, there was a report came out which said the average 16-year-old in Scotland now had the average reading age of a 13-year-old. And they were trying to suggest various reasons for this, part of it being the books that they're given to read are less and less challenging. It's just fascinating that they want 16-year-olds to have the vote now, and they've got the reading age of 13-year-olds. But I think that's as much a reflection that they don't take politics seriously, that's happened. But anyway, I've just thought give you a few minutes just to say some of your thoughts about the problems with Scottish education at the minute, which I know 2 minutes you could probably talk for 2 hours on this, but I'll just,
No, I'm not an expert on the curriculum. It's a long time since I even had grandchildren at school. But the report that really shocked me some time ago was the literacy rate at primary 7, where in the good areas, as it were, where there's no deprivation, it was only 85%. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the deprived area schools, I think it was 57%. Now, for my generation, that is inconceivable. I don't know how this can happen. I suppose we weren't all literate, but we all seemed to be literate. And if you go back and read the newspapers at that time, very different type of newspapers than we get now. You had to have very literate people who could read the newspapers at that time. For example, if they were reporting on Parliament, you didn't get a commentary. You got the whole text of the speech made by a major politician. So I really started to worry then. Then when we come off the international league tables, that should have been a warning sign to everybody in Scotland that there's something fundamentally wrong going on here. The other thing that worries me, I said I'm not an expert, but I cannot understand how universities can expect to attract the best of the world's younger talent if you're a lecturer and you're on a 3-month contract. That, again, is beyond my understanding, because the universities have always been universal, and they still are. Now we've got to compete for talent at the university level, and I don't see how we can do that successfully. I mean, if I was some young, very bright American, what the hell would I come to Edinburgh for a 3-month contract and not get paid during the summertime? So I think there's a lot of problems wrong in Scotland. One of the problems is that we haven't had, since Tom Johnson, a great educational minister. We haven't anybody who has got big vision in education. And at the moment, we're in a situation where we appear not to be able to educate our children to their full potential at a time in the world when other areas in which they will have to compete in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years are in fact producing intellectual rigor at a far higher standard than we are at the present time. I mean, I think we're in an emergency situation as far as that goes, but I don't find any sense of emergency in our population at all.
Yeah, I think the term intellectual rigor is a form of child abuse. He says rather crudely, but it does feel like that at times. Okay, my final question, which
let me tell you what I hate school, but I like one teacher because he picked me for the football team, and his name was Mr. Allen in primary 7, and it stuck with me all the days of my life. I can see him now, you know, standing in the corner at his desk, and he told us there were 2 critical things we had to understand. That one of the great things that had happened to civilization was the age of tolerance, the ability to take on arguments that you actually might not like. And the other was always be your most severe critic. Be your own most severe critic. Now, I doubt very much if teachers are saying that to pupils at the present time.
Yeah, well, that brings me on, and I know it's not your specialized subject. It's not many people's specialized subject, at least I hope it's not. But one of the reasons that I ended up doing this is that people started to increasingly raise concerns about aspects of the curriculum, like the sex education curriculum, transgender stuff on the curriculum, and so on. And I suppose one of my wider concerns about this, which comes back to your point there about being your own worst critic, is that part of this trend to me, to this identity obsession, seems to be a profound sense of narcissism that children are actually being educated in, right? That, you know, that teachers should validate, teachers should recognize, people it's this kind of, the teacher, rather than trying to draw children out of themselves, seem to be, it's almost like the world's turned again on its head, and teachers are kind of validating children, and they think that this is their job somehow, and this is part of the educational framework. And it does seem peculiar, and aspects of the curriculum I look at, and I just think it feels infantilizing, and it also feels like there's a loss of a sense of adult authority, and at times a loss of a sense of distinction between what an adult is and what a child is. Now, as you say, you haven't got even grandkids at school now, but I'm just wondering if you've got any general thoughts around these things that are happening in school.
I listened very carefully to the experts on the platform with me at the Dundee meeting, and I was quite shocked at what's happening in the schools. You know, young people should go through the magic of childhood and not be almost lectured about the different parts of the sexual body of a man or a woman. I don't think it's necessary at that very early age. And as you go on into secondary school, I mean, I can only go back to when I was, 15, 16. You're in a relatively, sometimes, a quite confused state of what you want to be or what you might not be. I mean, this will sound trivial, but it was very important. When I was 15, the big thing was that you had to be big and strong. Now, most of us weren't very big and strong, but there was an advert for a guy called Charles Atlas. The name was picked out very well, big and bulky. And if you signed on to his course, you would get the muscles and all the rest of it. And a number of us did that for a while. We went through a phase, and then we went through another phase. The best thing that happened to me was joining the Royal Navy, because you very quickly went through an adult phase when you actually did that. But during those years, 15 right up to 18, you had different phases going on in your life. Sometimes you were confused. Sometimes you thought you were going to do what you actually didn't do. It seems to me at the moment what they're trying to say to children is, right, there's fixed positions in your life. According to one of the Green MSPs, you can fix a child's position at the age of 8-year-old. That's you fixed. And you're saying to an adolescent, that's you fixed. I don't think there's anything fixed in a young person's life until you actually begin to start going into the world of work and finding out how the real work actually operates. So, but I say I'm not an expert on it. I'm just observing as someone has gone from childhood through the difficult years, through into adolescence, watched the difference, let me tell you, between myself and my friends after I joined the Royal Navy. You grow up very quickly in the military, because you have to grow up very quickly in the military. When you come back off leave, you discover that your pals of 6 or 9 months ago, you regard them as immature. And in fact, they were immature compared to me and others who joined the services. Now, this is not a plea for the return of national service. It's just an indication of how certain times in your life and certain events can have an effect on you different to the effect on other people. And I don't think school is the place for us to start telling children you've got a fixed gender and this is you for the rest of your life. I think it's fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, I agree. Right, okay, I'm throwing it open. There's a little hand. So I'll take a few. So if you want to put your hands up and you can contribution, I'll come to you. I will hopefully unmute you, he says. And, okay, I think you can now unmute yourself, Alex. Hopefully. You've got to unmute yourself, though, as well. Okay, I think you should be able to. Simon, I will try also. So if you can keep trying to unmute yourself, Alex. Mute. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hey, press the right button. Well done. Jim, I thought that point you made about your teacher saying that you're living in an age of tolerance, I thought was brilliant, because I don't think we're living in that age anymore. And it's kind of like around particularly around the national question up here, that people who would generally disagree in the past seem to have just completely suspended their disbelief in what the SNP as an organization is up to. Or it's almost like politics have gone on to pause and everything is just deferred to the nationalist struggle. And so therefore, it's almost what's happened inside the SNP in terms of the constitutional change is symptomatic or an echo of what's been happening in general in terms of politics, and that's the kind of the removal of ordinary people from center stage, and that's not just within the SNP, that's inside the SNP definitely, but it's also outside the SNP, and the amount of political debate reflects there's just no clash of ideas. There's nothing to tolerate. You don't need to tolerate anything when you don't agree with anybody. You can't tolerate people you agree with, because people in agreement with you ask nothing of you. You need people who you disagree with, and that debate just seems to have been eradicated from the political discourse in Scotland. So the question is, I suppose, what happens to all that now? What happens to those people who've suspended their disbelief, who've pushed the pause button on politics over the last 14 or 15 or whatever it is years, and got behind the SNP? Does that whole project just fall apart now? Do we end up with a kind of reignition of political debate in Scotland, or is it going to just be just a kind of morass, continue to be a morass but a different form?
No, I understand the point you're making, all right, that there's no real political debate takes place in Scotland at all. I mean, I wouldn't say it's at the Yaboo level, but it's not very much higher than the Yaboo level. And I think part of the problem is that there's a large chunk of the population, in a sense, has been disfranchised in the public arena. Working class isn't represented, you know. There's not many working class folk in Holyrood, and there's not many working class folk in the Scottish contingent down in Westminster either. And it's not like my generation. I mean, my generation produced its own leaders. I'm one of the last of the leaders of my generation. A number of my friends and colleagues have all been dying off. But the working class doesn't produce leaders outside the trade union movement now. They still produce them within the trade union movement, but not into the political arena. I mean, when I was active in the Fire Brigade Union, for example, I was picked out by the General Secretary as political potential. Now, it didn't say you're never going to be a trade union official, but there's a political line, and we'll now start educating you in order that if you go down that political line, then you'll know how to hold yourself against anybody. That doesn't take place now. I was brought up in Ayrshire, where we had a very strong political education among working class institutions. I mean, we went to classes every Sunday, and they weren't propaganda classes. They were meant to make us expand our vocabulary, meant to make us think. I mean, for example, they would say, next Sunday, Jim, you'll argue that incomes policy is essential for a socialist economy, and you, Simon, you'll argue against it. Don't care what you think just now, but next week, and that's the debate that will take place. Or is it possible to be a millionaire and a socialist? And the whole idea was to make us stretch our minds and think beyond propaganda. We now have a political class who only thinks in terms of propaganda. The outstanding feature of the Sturgeon government were photographs in the newspapers. I mean, if you look at the ferry, the ferry launch was done for a PR stunt. The vessel should never have been put in that position. And I was told by people in the shipyard that when they took it out of the position it was in for building, that actually made it a bigger problem for the men trying to build the ship, but that didn't matter. What mattered was, the PR stunt. So we have an elite. It's a very strange phenomenon. In purely formal terms, both at Westminster and at Holyrood, we have the best educated political class we've ever had. Most of them have been at university. My class, the majority of us had never been to university. So although they're extremely well educated formally, in political terms, they're all still student politics. I think Hamza Yusuf is really a student politician. And so we are into this situation where the other side have no legitimacy. That's basically it. Now, I don't believe that's true. I think people are unionists for legitimate reasons. It would be impossible after 315 years, fighting two major wars together, building the trade union movement together, intermarrying people across the border, for people not to feel an affinity to the union and want to keep the union. Equally, people like me want to break away. Two legitimate positions. But I have no problem. One of the reasons that Michael Forsyth and I got on so well together is that we respect each other's legitimacy. And, I don't do it now, but when Michael and I have debated, both of us have thoroughly enjoyed it, and so have the audience, because it's a genuine debate about genuine issues. We don't get that now. And the working class is removed from it. It's almost though they didn't matter at all. And I don't know what we do about it, because the new elite have such a grip on the system. Not just in the SNP, by the way. I've got press cuttings at the time when the leader of the Tory party got rid of 2 or 3 MSPs that she didn't like, Ruth Davidson. So, you know, the system allows a central organisation to impose its will in a much wider part of the body politic. And I think people have, I don't know how you're going to do it. I mean, I'm at the end of my political life, but you have to burst out of this somehow. And, you know, just say, if I'm for the union and you're for independence, I recognize it's legitimate, let's have a proper discussion, or vice versa. I mean, for example, I have no problem whatsoever in wanting the Scottish government to cooperate with the United Kingdom government for the good of the people as a whole. I see no advantage to the people in trying to pick a fight with the Westminster government, or them trying to pick a fight with the Scottish government. That doesn't mean that I am any less committed to the idea of independence. But this political class doesn't seem to be able to elevate the good of the public above their own sectarian position in the political sphere. And about a month ago, I was asked by somebody, how are you? And I said, I've got a split personality. And you know, they thought it was a medical condition. And I said, on my family side, I'm very happy. I meet all my grandchildren. I've got 2 great grandchildren, my stepdaughters and my daughters, you know, have got me in cotton wool. I said, but on the public side of my life, I am utterly depressed. I mean, I find it intellectually painful to listen to some of it. And how far we have deteriorated. When you've got time, go back and check the first of the intake to the Holyrood Parliament in 1999. And it was full of big, heavyweight figures. There were household names. You go in now and compare it with that first intake, and that's how much we've deteriorated in political quality. And I don't know the way out at the present time at all. Just don't know how people are going to do it. Who is going to burst this bubble and sort of tell the population they aren't any good? Now, I have argued with working class audiences that they should stand for Parliament. But the working class today is not the same as my time in the working class. They sort of think, oh, it's not for me. No, it's not really for me to do that kind of thing. And we'll take the lead from somebody else who's gone to university. So from my point of view, I would like to work with the working class to raise their ability, to raise their self-belief and say, hey, that lot's not any good. They might have a university degree, but they're not any good, and I'll replace them.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be hard to be better than the lot we've got. That's what's so incredible about it. I mean, it's the thing I'm increasingly, again, the reason I helped set this up was because in my head, I'm just thinking we need new institutions across the board, right? We need new unions, for example. So as an example, the UCU, my union, my lecturers union, apparently were at the forefront in Edinburgh yesterday. So in Edinburgh University, they were meant to be showing this video defending women's rights and questioning the transgender stuff. And my union apparently was at the forefront of making sure that it didn't happen by creating a protest situation that basically stopped a debate at Edinburgh University. And I'm in that union and I hate my union because I think it's a despicable organization that has got no principles that I can recognize that should be connected to being an academic. So it's mind-boggling. And I think across the board that's true. Anyway, I'll bring Alex in, and then I'll bring Jenny in. And if anyone else has got a question they want to raise, stick your hand up. We'll finish around about 1:15, I think. If that's all right with Jim. Anyway.
Well, Jim, you mentioned the intellectual hollowing out of the SNP. I'm not a supporter of the SNP, but to kind of, you know, what's happening with the SNP at the minute is not just a question for the SNP. It's happening more broadly, I think. I think we'd probably all agree on that. And I'm quite keen that we don't, although it's the ultimate question, what do we do about this situation? I want us to kind of slow down a wee bit and try and understand how we got here a bit longer. So I'll be interested in your thoughts on that. So, for example, as much as I know about the SNP, it used to have a political direction that was pro-growth, pro-industry, pro-oil and gas. We all remember that "It's our oil" slogan. Now, when you look at the programme of the SNP, at the forefront, it's pro-trans. And it's quite difficult to kind of see how that happened, chronologically even, in a matter of a couple of decades. So, as I say, I don't think the SNP are that different, or are doing things that are that different for what's happening in the rest of Europe. Although in saying that, the makeup of their national executive is quite shocking, and they might actually be the only organisation in the world that's like that. So I'm kind of keen that we really nail, or try to nail, how this process happened and how it was allowed to take place without much opposition. So I started off by mentioning your point, the intellectual hollowing out of the SNP is undoubtedly a factor in that, but it can't be the only thing.
Oh, no.
Well, hold on, Jim. I'll bring Jenny in, because I'm going to get a few people in so that they can throw you a few questions, and then you can pick and choose. I mean, that it is one of another strange aspect of politics that, I mean, the Green Party are officially opposed to growth, so, which I do feel like walking around to their houses and taking all their money and possessions off them, and saying, would you like some growth now? But anyway, Jenny.
Thanks, Jim. I find it very inspiring to listen to you, although you're at the end of your political life. It's very, very useful, I think, to have somebody who can take the long view of things, both backwards and forwards. And I just wanted to sort of raise the question of Brexit, because that was, if anything, the only time, certainly to my knowledge, that you really engaged the working class across the country. Whatever side you were on in that Brexit debate, it was a real debate. And I think that people were very engaged by it. And at the end of the day, the working class was saying, we are sick of this system. We're sick of not being listened to. We're sick of being dictated to by bureaucrats in Europe. And yet, obviously, that you built on it to some extent, in that you made connections one side or the other during that debate. But I get the feeling, I don't know if you do, that actually we have to start. I know Alex is saying, how did we get here? And that's an important thing to work out. But I think we have to start with the issues that really do concern the working class, the political issues, and start engaging more people around those. Now, obviously, we've identified that education is one area which is absolutely in need of in need of a proper debate. But it's also an opportunity, I think, to involve working class people in a very, very direct way, because it's their children and their grandchildren who are really going to suffer if this isn't taken in hand. So I'm wondering actually what you think. I mean, I was very struck by the idea you were all called off on the weekend to have debates, to toughen you up for politics. And I wonder if, in fact, that's one of the things that we have to really address, really strengthening working class people, middle class people, right, who've, you know, just lost the ability to really engage in politics. And perhaps we need to, you know, to have lessons at weekends for people to sort of actually start debating and demanding a hearing, you know, in schools, in Parliament and so forth, and perhaps a few of them to stand in elections, you know, on the basis of fighting these things. So I'd be interested. I mean, I can imagine you feel demoralized, as you say, when you're outside of the cocoon of your family. But I think we have to look at the issues that are really concerning working class people first and foremost. Obviously, we can inform that as much as possible intellectually, you know, but I think at grassroots level, we do have to do something about drawing people into actually engaging with politics.
Yeah. You're not going to get political education in the working class from any of the political parties that are operating at the present time. I would go as far as to say it's not in their interest to have a well politically educated working class. I'm not saying they sit down and say we'll not educate the working class, but I think instinctively they probably understand that better things are the way they are very good for them. And I think what is happening tonight, for example, with the organisation Scottish Union for Education, we require some sort of national organisation that engages in political education, where you can go into the housing schemes and you can get folk there to come along, even if it's only 10 or 12 at the beginning, to actually talk about the political things that matter to them, which is the economy, why we need growth, why education of their children and their grandchildren is vital, not just for their not just, you know, as some sort of thing that's good for them. In Dundee, I tried to set it in a much wider context. I mean, I've worked in the Middle East and in Asia. And what I discovered in Asia was a dynamic. And that was when I worked there, those countries were just starting to rise. But they're not pouring the same percentage of GDP as we do into education. But proportionately for them, they're pouring a great deal into education for their children. And they are going to be the powers in the world economy over the next 100 years. And here we are, 5 million people in Scotland. How do we earn our living in that very new world that is now developing, in which Asia is going to be the dominant feature in the competition in the trade area? How are we going to earn our living in that unless we can invest in education in a way that makes our young people as good critical thinkers as is happening in India and elsewhere? I think if we've got to set education outside of the Scottish context, in the world context, to make parents understand that if their children are going to have a decent life here in Scotland, then they're going to be able to take on very tough-minded contemporaries in Asia in the competition for who gets the biggest share of growth in the world. There's a huge amount at stake, not just in Scotland, but for Western civilization at the present time, on how we handle our education to make them fit for the world that is in fact coming. And I don't think we're talking in that context at all. And that's one that we've got to get over. But to get into the working class, you have to have organizations. Now, the working class is organized in its own communities, but it is not organized in a way that has an impact on the national scene with working class representation, representing working class people. You know, Ash Regan got a lot of good publicity for Ash Regan during the leadership of the SNP. But Ash Regan is a middle-class woman from the Borders who represents one of the deprived areas in Edinburgh. Now, that's ridiculous. That area should be represented by someone from that area. But, you know, I say at the moment, I don't know, but I could, if I won the Euro Millions on Friday night, I knew exactly what I would do. I would spend the big proportion of the cash in setting up a working class political education organization to go into the housing schemes and bring those folk to meet people who can explain things to them and explain that they are very important people. I think the problem with the working class at the moment, they don't think they're important. And when you mention Brexit, that's absolutely the case. They finally had a chance to speak, whereas normally they don't get a chance to speak. You know, they're getting told how to think and how not to speak as well as to speak. So there's this need for it. And what you know, Stuart's doing with the Scottish Union for Education is more valuable than perhaps you realise. One thing I learned in politics, I was told right at the early stage by a chap called Jackie Cowan, that you mustn't think that politics is something you can measure by your material achievements, either for yourself or the population. Politics is about sowing, like the farmer sowing seeds. You sow ideas. Sometimes they lie fallow, and then the right circumstances come and you get the harvest. So what you're doing at the moment is sowing ideas. And the more ideas that are sown, the more they're held to, then the better chance in the next 10 or 15 years of them actually bringing something different into our society. And I might not be here when that happens, but I've got a great faith in democracy, actually. And democracy can be grossly abused, and very frequently is. But somehow or other, there's always a corrective that, you know, calls those to account who have abused it. I mean, you take the SNP at the moment. This all began with one person going to the police and saying, I donated that 600,000, where the hell has it gone? You know, and then a second person went in and said exactly the same thing. And, you know, you can trace everything that's happening today to that guy going to the police station. So, you know, and I don't want to say to folk, you know, give up, because that would be the wrong thing to do. This is a very bad time for people who think that thinking and debate and discussion matter. But if you keep arguing that debate and discussion matter, then I think ultimately that breaks through in a democracy. Might take some time, but you've got to have what Tom Devine calls stamina for the job.
Yeah, I think very true. Right, I'll have Joe, and then I'll have Seb, and I think that's it, unless anyone wants to put their hand up quickly. Joe, on you go.
I'll be as quick as I can be. I feel a little bit swithering about coming on to interrupt a discourse which has been very much about how we got here and looking at the situation from a considerable analytical distance, for which I'm very grateful. My concerns are very fixed in the present moment. I always thought of myself as very left. I voted yes in 2014. I got swept up in the Corbyn movement, and I don't defend all of that. I would now vote for any party that brought an end to this indoctrination in the schools. And I would vote for any party that would protect children from the things that are being done to them. And there are two things that especially I focus on, is the real physical damage that is being done to children. Putting healthy children on puberty blockers and even mastectomizing adolescent girls. It's utterly abhorrent, and I'll vote for anyone who'll stop it. And the second thing is the corruption. With these organizations, Stonewall, LGBTYS, have got themselves into all our public institutions. And we seem to have a situation now where our public institutions are answerable to those organizations and not to elected representatives, and therefore not to the people. That's all I wanted to say.
Very, very useful. I'll bring in Seb, and then I'll bring we've got Seb, then Kirsty. That'll be it, and then I'll bring Jim back in. Seb.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. It's been great to hear your thoughts. I just wanted to look back and then briefly look forward. Going back to your time sort of in the SNP and the so-called 79ers, or the 79 group, who maybe showed some of that perseverance or sowed some of those seeds at the time and needed to come back in different ways. I was just wondering, if you look at the situation now, they're definitely not coming from within the SNP or anywhere within Scottish politics, but I wondered if you had any sense of hope that there are pockets anywhere in our society where those seeds are being sowed, and yeah, finish on a bit. Tell us there's hope, please.
Okay, I'll bring in Kirsty, and then I'll then over to Jim for some final thoughts.
Hi, Jim. Thank you so much. I always love listening to you and really appreciate your insights. Just briefly, in terms of what both you and Stuart were saying about the working class and trying to, I guess, make them believe in themselves, I guess, and sort of empower them to speak. I work at, or have worked at further education colleges, so I guess theoretically we are working with the working class, and I completely agree with what both of you are saying. But I guess what I'm saying is further education is theoretically doing that, but they are very much controlled by the exact ideology that we're talking about. So, you know, our theoretically, when we are empowering them and making them believe in themselves, we're just telling them that they're wonderful and they're important, and very much bringing in this sort of narcissistic kind of ideology that Stuart was talking about earlier. And it's very much a case of, oh, you are amazing as you are, so don't try any harder, and the world has to accept you. But also there is so much coddling in terms of pretty much all the students now in further education have got mental health issues, and I don't want to disparage anyone who genuinely does, but you know, again, there's a lot of protection against all this, to the extent that people don't have to actually achieve, you know, they don't actually need to pass things, they're still past the course without. So anyway, long way of saying really is people, I think, are on the surface trying to do this, and they're doing it the easy way. You know, they are just passing people, they are just you know, ticking boxes to make it look like they're helping the working class. And I guess it's very much the opposite mentality that you were speaking about in terms of your teacher. And I guess what I'm saying is how do you think we can get back to encouraging the mentality of your teacher, you know, when you have the image of him standing in the corner and the two things that he said to you, how do we get back to that?
Right, before Jim, everyone of course comes to want to ask a question at the end. Jules, and then over to Jim.
Okay, just very, very quickly, Jim, and that's for this tea tonight. I think time is of the essence. And my worry is that unless somebody takes the bull by the horns very, very soon with the literacy, numeracy, critical thinking skills within the Scottish education system, I worry that it's going to take generations to get back to what Scotland had originally. And with the declining birth rates in Scotland, and I was looking at them 2016, 54,500, 2022, just under 47,000. We have a declining birth rate. So the number of people that we're going to have in coming through to stand on that global stage that we talked about is going to get less and less and less. Somebody needs to wake up and start making changes.
Yeah, right. Okay, Jim. Just, I know you can't cover everything. Just what you've got in your head.
How we got here, I think one of the reasons is the failure of the left. I think the left has never really recovered from the battering it took in the Thatcher years. Because in the Thatcher years, the right gained the intellectual ascendancy. And the left, I don't think, has ever recovered. And the Blair government and the Brown government didn't bring back the left into a feeling that, you know, it was, if not equal, superior to the right-wing intellectuals. And so it's gone for what a number of them would regard as much easier territory, which I think is more difficult, but they think it's much easier. And that's, you know, the woke agenda on identity politics, and we're now mired in. I think it's a failure of the left. And in fact, a number of my friends and I were having a discussion about this. There hasn't been a major left-wing theoretician for a very long time who has looked at and tackled contemporary capitalism and given the left some idea of perhaps new directions. And so I think it's a failure of the left has allowed them to go into what some of them regard as easy peasy areas where they will get applauded rather than attacked. So what my friends and I have decided to do is form a discussion group in Scotland and invite people along to see where we can re-examine where the left should stand in this present day capitalist society, which is very different from the one that I was reared on. And that's just a wee start. I think that both institutionally, we have to have people who will have the moral courage to stand up and say what's happening in the schools isn't just wrong, it is stupid, and be prepared to take the flak that comes along with saying that. I think there's a great deal of a lack of moral courage among people who should know better at the present time, who are afraid of being attacked by zealots from small groups. And until they find the moral courage or encouraged to have the moral courage, then we're going to have problems. But I think there should be a continuing onslaught on those people inside our institutions. Outside our institutions, I've got to ask people to start organising meetings in working class areas, to tell the working class what's going on, because basically a lot of them will not know what's going on and what they can do about it. I mean, I was astonished at the Dundee meeting when a parent went along to the school and asked the head teacher about what her child was being taught and told it's none of your business. Now, you know, you get the working class organised on that. So I think there's got to be, in the institutions, you've got to have folk able to stand up, take the risks, get hammered verbally, but so what? I mean, I couldn't care less what any trans zealot says about me. I really don't care one way or the other. And I think we've got to get that. But outside of the institutions, should really think about how we put together a national organisation that can actually go into the working class and say to them, hey, you are as good, if not better, than anyone else. In fact, at Western Hales in 2014, I addressed a meeting, and this is a working class area in Edinburgh. And the complaints from that audience were about the political elite. They didn't like them. They talked out. And I said to them, that's your fault. Everybody in this room has more experience than any of the elites you're talking about. Why don't you stand for Parliament? And you can see them going, oh, no, me, no. And I think we've got to get through to working class folk. You've got to stand up as well. You've not to sort of say, well, somebody else should be doing that for me. I come from a different area of the working class where we did stand up for ourselves. We did assert our rights, and that's not happening at the present time. Moral courage. At the end of the day, anything good that's defended in a society is based on someone or some group having the moral courage to say, we're not putting up with this.
Fantastic. Really good. Thanks again, Jim. I mean, I agree, but I'm also conscious that obviously people are very individual now and separated. And that's one of the things that I'm finding a bit frustrating, is how to get the message out to more and more people, how to, whether it's leaflet in the estates around schools or whatever it is. I'm going to try absolutely everything, because I totally agree. I think ordinary people are the solution. Right? They don't buy into the vast majority of this rubbish. They might not have all the answers, but I do think we just need to give people a sort of framework for being able to express some of their anxieties, but also tell them, look, this is what's happening with your kids, for example, and we can do something about it. And I think we genuinely can do something about it. And if there's anybody here in the meeting, one of the things that we are going to try and set up is a fundraising group, because we need to raise a few £1,000 here and there so that we can advertise on Facebook, so we can print leaflets, so we can give these leaflets out to parents and out to schools and so on. And if anyone's interested in getting involved in that, I've set up an event in about 3 weeks' time. I've got a professional fundraiser coming. I'm going to try and get a few other people who've done fundraising, and we just need to get the odd grant here and there. We can just advertise what we're doing far and wide, and we're going to be traveling the country doing meetings like the one Jim did in Dundee, and I'll probably going to come back with that cap in hand, asking Jim if he wants to come to, the north of Scotland, the south of Scotland, everywhere else. He might not have time and energy to do it, but I'm probably going to be asking him. But anyway, thanks again to Jim. Thank you all for turning up, and do get in touch, and I'll be getting in touch in the future. So thank you.
Cheers. Bye.